Welcome to Panthera's Oddities. Did a computer from the 1980s really communicate with a farmer in the 16th century? The Dodleston messages is a phenomenon dating back to the 1980s in which a household in the quiet British village of Dodleston, Cheshire, allegedly received messages on their computer from a farmer in the 16th century. An economics teacher living in the small village was thrust into a strange link that tied him across centuries with a past inhabitant of his home via an early model personal computer and its word processing software. Both accused the other of trickery, poltergeist activity, witchcraft, and devilry, but eventually a bond between the two was formed. Cross-century communications are never easy, however, especially when the future gets involved. This seemingly paranormal event has been documented by Ken Webster, one of the occupants of the household at the time, and has been covered in his book, The Vertical Plane. Ken Webster was renovating an old cottage in Dodleston. He had recently moved in. Webster lived with his girlfriend, Debbie, and another friend, Nick. Not long after they moved in, weird stuff began to happen. A set of six-toed footsteps appeared to be walking up the walls. A cat, maybe, but 6 toes? Ken, Debbie, and Nick all agreed that this was a joke. They suspected each other of pulling the prank. Ken painted over the footprints, but the following day, the prints came back. Over days and weeks, the occupants of the cottage experienced chalk marks appearing, sudden cold spots, a breeze strong enough to lift a newspaper into the air, a feeling of someone being there, and later on, noises like footsteps. They found tins of cat food neatly piled in a pyramid and more weird track marks on the floor. It seemed that they had a poltergeist, but then there were more mysterious developments. For a period of 2 years in the 1980s, Webster found himself corresponding directly with an individual who said that he lived on that site of the cottage 4 centuries earlier. The correspondence began with messages left on his home computer on the kitchen table. The Vertical Plane, written by Kenneth Webster, is a riveting personal experience of a fault in the fabric of time, and a moving account of the relationship across 400 years. It was 1984, and Ken Webster, along with Debbie and Nick, went out to visit a friend for a couple of hours one evening. Upon their return, Webster decided to check the upstairs BBC microcomputer, which had been left on. To his surprise, upon opening the word processor, he found the following message: Ken, Debbie, Nick. True are the nightmares of a person that fears. Safe are the bodies of the silent world. Turn, pretty flower, turn towards the sun, for you shall grow and sow. But the flower reaches too high and withers in the burning light. Get out your bricks. Pussycat, pussycat went to London to seek fame and fortune. Faith must not be lost, for this shall be your redeemer. A chilling poem for sure, and one that couldn't be explained by the 3 residents at the time. The computer, a BBC Micro, was returned, and another wasn't borrowed until February 1985 from the college. It was here that, again, another message was received after an evening when the computer was left turned on. This time it had a completely different tone and grammar style. The message in the file reads as follows. I write on behalf of many. What strange words thou speak, although I must confess that I hath also been ill-schooled. Sometimes methinks changes are somewhat barful, for they break main asleep in mine bed. Thou art goodly man, who hath fancy women who dwell in mine home. I hath seen many alterations in thou home. 'Tis a fitting place with lights, which devil maketh, and costly things. 'Twas a great crime to have bribed mine house. L.W. It was by now that Webster and his friends realized something really strange was happening. Who had written these strange words? Who was L.W.? Why did a writer of the messages assume someone had stolen his house? Through questions and answers, the modern trio learned that L.W. stood for Lucas Wayneman. There are many other messages from Lucas. He said that in 1546, he was arrested by the local sheriff, Sir Thomas Falston, because Lucas was found discovered to be communicating through this so-called light box. The charge was witchery and deviltry. Lucas, in reply, suddenly announced that the light box was brought to his house by someone called One, who hailed from the year 2109. Still curious, Webster decided he was going to use the BBC micro to send a simple message to the year 2109 entitled Calling 2109. 2109 wrote back, "The messages are hard to follow. They talk in general New Age terms about higher purposes." This is an example of 2109 messages. The eyes are open, yet nothing do you see. The gray retarding mass is your convict. Quietly, alone he sits in the dark, waiting for sentence to be passed and demanding through the eyes of the blind of unspoken questions the answers of ethereal kind. The soul, he is a traveler. Chain no bar can hold him to frail flesh. Here is the ruler of time and space. Here is your God. So we are to assume this meant Lucas. And another 2901 message was directed at Webster, Deb, and Nick. To understand that you three have a purpose that shall in your lifetime change the face of history, we, 2109, must not affect your thoughts directly, but give you some sort of guidance that will allow room for your own destiny. All we can say is that we are all part of the same God, whatever He is. Attempts to test the messages, 2109 said that they were endangering the mission they were on. So I ask, what mission? This can be left to many speculations and opinions. Despite the charge of witchcraft hanging over his head, Lucas continued to write to Ken Webster for many months. Lucas told Ken he was terrified of what the authorities might do to him, but still continued to use the light box. Messages continued from Lucas, then he said goodbye, saying he would write a book about his experiences, which he hoped Ken Webster would find and read in 1985. 2109 said that at some point the book will be found. Nick Point, an academic, said if such book does exist and is ever found, it would be hard to argue against. Nobody has ever found such book. There were some more odd messages from 2109. That was the end of the Dodleston messages. Webster used computers from the college's pool, so it would have been impossible to rig them all. Also, once the computers were turned off, nothing was saved, so it would have been impossible to plant information that would show up when the computers were turned back on. Now, this happened long before people had the internet. The computers didn't have modems, and there was no way to send the messages from another location. Webster moved from the local school to a job in Manchester, and the story died. Webster quickly lost interest in this search for truth and said, "I became bored. I wanted to go home to read about something else." Ken and Debbie have since disappeared for the rest of their lives. They have never come forward to claim the hoax. Lucas and 2109 have never been heard from again. Lastly, all involved in the experience are still to this day trying to make sense of what happened back in 1984. This is a very odd story indeed, one you can believe or not. But to say there are so many articles and research on this subject, it's hard not to believe, in my opinion. Tell me what you think. My email address is below, and if you like this story, please hit the like button and subscribe. It is totally free and it really helps my channel. All original art has been done by Elise Davis. Check her out at PaleRose33 at Instagram.com. I would like to thank Tattooed Biker, Elise Davis, and Odin for keeping the faith in my return. Love you guys. Bye all.